We have complete sympathy with any corporate body that made a call for good governance, for value for money, for efficiency of spend, etc., etc. And we still know that, in many countries, something like 15 to 30% of the budgets routinely cannot be explained away. And I think that's a legitimate request. And citizens also make those requests, even if they don't pay as you earn, or they don't pay income tax. They do pay value-added tax, and they do want to see that go to the right place. But I think it is a different thing from saying that therefore they shouldn't have to pay tax. I think the first principle of corporate social responsibility is that you should be paying taxes, and that you should not be trying to evade your tax responsibility simply to make profits.
The flip side of the argument would be, yes, but if we've been paying tax for the last 5-10 years and governments just keep wasting it, why should I keep throwing good money after bad?
Well, partly because, there's two reasons. I think one is that not all taxes, not all public money gets spent, disappears and doesn't get spent well. Quite a lot of it is actually going into the things that we're seeing, which is, universal primary education. We're seeing, improvements in terms of health. We're seeing investment in irrigation and so on. It's not all bad. It's just that our level of expectation is much higher than what we're getting. And that way, I say I'm completely sympathetic with the argument that we need to get a better governed state, not just in Kenya, but all over the continent. But I don't think that's an excuse for shirking your tax responsibility.
For a lot of citizens across sub-Saharan Africa, government is over there. Right. It's not, there's no direct connection between us and the state, because the ambition usually is, like, for example, in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, get a good job, get my kids into a private school, get access to private medical care. The state is something we try and avoid actively. Doesn't that make it harder to convince people that, paying taxes is actually something you should do?
I think one of the biggest viruses we've got on the continent really is the lack of sense of citizenship. And citizenship is not just simply improving one's living conditions and one's economic status in life. It's also about playing an active role in the governance of that country. And the more we do that, I think the more we have the opportunity to influence, the kind of outcomes that we want to see at government level that would lead us not to having to privatize everything that we need. One of the things that I'm always shocked about is if you look at the cost that, not across the continent, but if you look at the cost that the middle class pay for education here, some of that money could buy, large tracts of land. They could be investing in property that would go several generations down the line. But what happens is that we essentially invest that in education. And we watch the public schools around us essentially collapse under the burden of a mass of this huge demographic, this huge youth bulge that we're seeing across the continent. Whereas we could actually, for example, find a way of joining. I've always thought that if I took my kids to public school and retained even half of what I pay in a private school, I would actually influence the conditions for many, many other children in that school. Now that may be a minority view, but I think it is one that makes a lot of sense, that actually the middle class pays a lot more for very basic services, that if they had spent half of that money trying to get the government to work properly, they wouldn't have to pay that money.
So this is basically a tragedy of the commons, isn't it?
The more that we erode the public service, the more the costs go up for the middle class.